The story of American resistance, fighting for change and justice. The history of the United States is deeply intertwined with stories of resistance. From the earliest days of colonization to the modern fight for equality and justice, resistance has been a driving force shaping the nation. It is the story of ordinary people rising against oppression, injustice, and inequality, often at great personal cost, to build a better future. The revolutionary spirit. The first major chapter in America's resistance story began with the American Revolution, 1775 to 1783. Faced with British taxation without representation, colonists united under the cry of no taxation without representation and took a stand against imperial rule. Events like the Boston Tea Party of 1773, where patriots protested the British Tea Act by dumping tea into Boston Harbor, symbolized their defiance. Figures such as George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and Benjamin Franklin emerged as leaders of this movement, which culminated in the signing of the Declaration of Independence in 1776, a bold assertion of freedom and resistance against tyranny, abolition, and the fight against slavery. Resistance against slavery is one of the most profound chapters in American history. From the 18th to the 19th century, enslaved people and abolitionists fought tirelessly to end this brutal institution. The Underground Railroad, led by brave individuals like Harriet Tubman. This secret network helped thousands of enslaved people escape to freedom. Tubman herself made multiple trips into slave-holding states, risking her life to guide others to safety. Frederick Douglass in The Power of Words. Douglass, a former slave turned orator and writer, became a leading voice in the abolitionist movement. His speeches and writings exposed the horrors of slavery and inspired resistance. John Brown's raid in 1859, abolitionist John Brown led an armed raid on Harper's Ferry, hoping to incite a slave rebellion. Though the raid failed, it became a rallying cry for the abolitionist cause. The culmination of these efforts came with the Civil War, 1861 to 1865, and the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, followed by the abolition of slavery with the 13th Amendment in 1865. The Civil Rights Movement. The mid-20th century saw a seismic resistance movement against racial segregation and discrimination, particularly in the South. Sparked by centuries of systemic racism and injustice, the Civil Rights Movement mobilized millions to demand equality. Rosa Parks and the Montgomery bus boycott in 1955. Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on a segregated bus in Montgomery, Alabama. Her arrest sparked a year-long boycott that led to the desegregation of public buses. Martin Luther King Jr. and nonviolent resistance. King's leadership in events like the Selma to Montgomery marches and his famous "I Have a Dream" speech during the March on Washington in 1963 inspired a nation. His commitment to nonviolent resistance was a cornerstone of the movement. Malcolm X and Black Power. While King advocated nonviolence, Malcolm X represented a different facet of resistance, emphasizing self-defense and the empowerment of black communities. Student sit-ins and Freedom Riders. Young activists staged sit-ins at segregated lunch counters and rode buses into the Deep South to challenge segregation laws. Their courage and sacrifice highlighted the brutality of racism to the world. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 marked significant victories, but the struggle for racial equality continues. The women's suffrage movement. Another powerful resistance movement in America was the fight for women's right to vote. For decades, women faced systemic exclusion from political processes, but they refused to remain silent. Seneca Falls Convention in 1848, activists like Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott organized the first women's rights convention in Seneca Falls, New York, demanding equal rights, including suffrage. Susan B. Anthony and the suffragists. Anthony, along with Stanton and others, tirelessly campaigned for women's suffrage. They faced arrests, ridicule, and resistance but never gave up. The 19th Amendment. After years of protests, marches, and advocacy, women finally won the right to vote in 1920 with the ratification of the 19th Amendment. Labor movements and workers' rights. Industrialization in the 19th and early 20th centuries brought about harsh working conditions, low wages, and exploitation. Workers organized to resist these injustices, demanding fair treatment. The Haymarket Affair, 1886, a rally for an 8-hour workday in Chicago, turned violent when a bomb exploded. Despite setbacks, the labor movement persisted. The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory Fire, 1911, this tragedy, in which over 100 garment workers, mostly women, died, galvanized efforts to improve workplace safety and labor laws. Cesar Chavez and farm workers' rights in the 1960s and 1970s. Chavez led the United Farm Workers, UFW, in advocating for better wages and conditions for agricultural laborers through strikes, boycotts, and marches. Modern resistance movements. The spirit of resistance remains alive in modern America, addressing issues ranging from racial justice to climate change. The Black Lives Matter movement. BLM, founded in 2013 after the acquittal of Trayvon Martin's killer. BLM has become a global force, protesting police brutality and systemic racism. The movement gained unprecedented momentum in 2020 following the killing of George Floyd, sparking worldwide demonstrations. Standing Rock protests, 2016, Native American tribes and allies resisted the construction of the Dakota Access Pipeline, which threatened sacred lands and water sources. Their fight highlighted indigenous rights and environmental concerns. The Women's March, 2017. In response to political events, millions of women marched across the globe advocating for gender equality, reproductive rights, and social justice. Climate activism movements like the Sunrise Movement and individuals like Greta Thunberg have mobilized millions to demand action on climate change, resisting industries and policies that harm the planet. The power of resistance. America's progress has been built on the backs of those who resisted injustice and demanded change. From the revolution to the fight for LGBTQ+ rights, from labor strikes to environmental activism, the story of resistance is woven into the nation's identity. Resistance in America is not merely about opposing oppression. It is about envisioning a better future and working tirelessly to achieve it. This enduring spirit continues to inspire generations to stand up for their rights, their communities, and their planet.